Hello everyone, this is Lala, and today I'm going to be making the video where I rank all of the challengers who have done at least 3 seasons on the franchise. So I made 4 videos going over the Era 1 women, the Era 2 women, the Era 3 women, and the Era 4 women, and I didn't know if I was going to make a video combining all of them, but I decided, you know what, might as well just do it. So before I get to the actual rankings, I am going to go over the criteria as to what I'm using to rank all of these women. And just before I get into it, I'm not going to go into depth with the women since I've already done that in the 4 other videos. So it's just going to be very quick since I have to go over like 70-ish women. So the first criteria that I'm using are competition. So this includes dailies, eliminations, and final performances. So the more early boots, the lower. The more amount of finals that you've won, reached, or getting to the end game, i.e. closer to the final, you'll be higher. I won't be discussing dailies in this video, I just don't feel like it. If you have a bad elimination record, you'll be lower. The more finals that you lost, the more finals that you've missed, and the more seasons that you've done but not getting close to the final or make it to the end game, you will be lower. So the next criteria that I'm taking into place is longevity. So this involves the amount of seasons someone did and the wide bracket of years that they competed in. So if you've done less seasons, chances are you'll be lower. If you only did seasons in a few years, you'll probably be lower. The more seasons that you've done and you've been successful at them, you'll be higher. The more seasons that you've done and have had many years of success or many decades of success, you'll be higher on the list. The third criteria that I am looking into are the eras and formats that some of these women competed in. So, seasons with no eliminations, obviously lower on the list. Seasons where you had success on duo or individual seasons will be higher on the lists. Seasons where there are vote offs or everyone goes to the finals, you'll be lower on the list. Success on team seasons with barely any eliminations, you'll probably be lower on the list. And success on modern seasons where it's more competitive and it's harder to make it to the end, you'll be higher on the list. And then the final category that I have here are politics. So this is the alliances that the women have gotten into. I don't know if I'm going to delve too much into that here because I'm going to go over them quickly. Game moves that they have made, and avoiding eliminations due to politics. So now that I've gone over all that, let's get to the rankings. So at dead last, which is 77th, is Sofia Huhui Jimenez. Hopefully I said that correctly. I don't have much to say about her. She was booted early in all of her seasons, and she only did 3 seasons, and was one of the first 3 boots in all of them. Even on Argentina, she flopped, so it's not just the language barrier being the reason why she performed poorly. I just think the show's just not for her. At 76th is Shauvon Torres. So she's only higher than Huhui because she at least DQ'd once on the ruin, so you can't really blame her for that. She was the first boot on the Duel 2 due to her hookup with CT, and she quit on Cutthroat when she knew she was going to be eliminated during the 3rd round. She was also just really poor at the challenges and politics, and it's clear that this show wasn't for her. At 75th is Cynthia Roberts. So, 2 of her seasons are from dated formats where World Rules All Stars really wasn't a competition at all. And she was booted relatively early on Battle of the Sexes 2, which was a season based off voteouts. And she was also on the first boot on All Stars 3, which was a modern season. So there really isn't anything else to add or discuss. And while she's definitely iconic, the challenge, especially the modern challenge, wasn't really the show for her, even in the Battle of the Sexes format where it was more about competition in compared to her first season. At 74th is Montana McGlynn. So she competed on one of the first 4 seasons, the second seasons, which I don't hold much weight towards for the reasons that I've discussed earlier, just due to the janky format. And she was the first boot on the Gauntlet 1, where they knew that she was weaker. And despite lasting mid-season on the Gauntlet 2, she was a weaker player there, and that's why she was also sent home. She also only did the OG era and was weak in the weakest era, so obviously, with the lack of longevity and performing poorly in an era that was already weaker compared to the other three eras, clearly she had to be low here. At 73rd is Simone Kelly. So she's only this high because she played in a more competitive era than some of the others below her. But despite that, she was an early boot on all of her seasons, though she was only taken out normally once on Battle of the Exes 2, though I doubt she would have made it past the first redemption had she not gotten DQ'd on Dirty 30. She won 1 to 2 redemptions, which somewhat bummed her out. She quit on Rivals 3, though I'm pretty sure they had a high chance of being eliminated that round had they not done that anyways. At 72nd is Latoya Jackson. So essentially, I find her journey on the show to be relatively similar to Simone's based on their performance on their three seasons. And essentially, she's only higher because she at least won a solo elimination. But still, Latoya has been booted early in every single season she did. And I think the furthest that she got was being a fourth boot on Free Agent. And her only doing 3 seasons definitely bit her in the butt. It seemed like she was in a decent enough position socially on Invasion of the Champions, but she couldn't win her way into the Oasis, and she got purged and couldn't make it past the first redemption on Dirty 30. And at 71st is Jessica McCain. Honestly, I'm shocked that she's this high, since she's been booted in 3 out of her 4 seasons within the first 2 rounds. So she's been an early boot, and a really early boot on 3 of her 4 seasons. The only reason why she isn't lower is that she at least won an elimination on on Rivals 3 and a redemption on Battle of the Exes 2, and she just missed the endgame on Free Agents, making it relatively deep on that season. At 70th is Jisela Delgado, and we're going to knock out quite a bit of the Era 1 and Era 2 women. So during the 3 seasons on her flagship run, Jisela was a weak competitor who was also kicked out of the game slash show overall. She did make it to the final on All Stars 1, but it really wasn't a competitive cast at all, and she flopped horrendously in the final. The politics really just isn't there for her, and she did poorly on 3 seasons, where her 4th season wasn't good enough to bump her up much. At 69th is Beth Stolarcyzk. She is someone who has done several seasons, so we have more of a sample size of her, but that really didn't do her any good. Beth has not made it to a final outside of her first season, which holds no weight in my opinion since no one went home there, and that's horrible. Her social game is really poor, and she never really made it far outside of that, with the example of the Gauntlet 2, where she made it pretty deep in that. She can win some eliminations, but they are mainly weight-based and just doesn't have a good track record on the show. During this ranking, I didn't include All Stars Rivals or All Stars 5, and I'm sure she's going to drop once I do include that in a few months. At 68th is Ayanna Mackins. Ayanna managed to get herself sent home on a season where no one went home, i.e., her first season, and she's had quite a few early boots during her career, i.e., Battle of the Sexes 2 and All Stars 4. She made it relatively deep on Battle of the Sexes 1, but she quit, so her motivation wasn't there to make it to the endgame. And All Stars 2 was her only really impressive season, as she made it to the final and won a few eliminations there. The social game just really isn't there, and neither is the strategic, and most of her seasons were just jankier formats. At 67th is Trishelle Cannatella. She's also someone who is very inconsistent with her journey, and she's also just a mess socially too, and I don't recall her ever being that strategic either. She made it to the halfway point on Gauntlet 1, then made it to the final on a very impressive battle of the seasons 2, but she's been an early boot in all of her other seasons. So, Rivals 2, she quit. She was out second on the Inferno one, and then she was out first out of the women on All Stars 1. So Trishelle just really isn't good at this and is way too much of a train wreck. At 66th is Mandi Moyer. So I find Mandi to be kind of a weird one to assess, where half of her seasons involved her being directly attached to Wes, and it caused her downfall twice. She was the second boot twice, technically, i.e., Cutthroat and Battle of the Exes 1. And the one season she made it to the final on, she and Jen were DQ'd very early in that final, but she played a decent game there. Mandi was seen as a weaker woman overall, and it's why she was sent home most of the time. At 65th is Melinda Collins. I will say that she had an impressive All Stars too, with it being the only season she really made it far on, but there are still all of her other seasons. She was a second boot twice, i.e., Fresh Meat 1 and the Battle of the Seasons 2, and her other seasons had her booted roughly around the mid-season point, i.e., Cutthroat and Gauntlet 3, where she had a powerful alliance on Gauntlet 3, but her elimination record's just really, really poor. And like I mentioned earlier, one season just isn't enough to make up for all of her flaws and not good showings. At 64th is Johanna Botta. Outside of her debut season, she's never been booted early, but Johanna's individual stats are just really lacking. It also doesn't help that her winning season is also seen as a fluke, despite her having a powerful alliance on that season, and all of the seasons that she competed on were team seasons, which it should be easier to thrive on the team seasons, and she really didn't. And team seasons in that era specifically were just a lot less competitive, so that's why she's here. At 63rd is Janelle Casanave. Out of everyone, she is someone who could have been a lot higher. She won the Inferno 3 and held her own there as a rookie who never had to go into elimination. And she had a really good All Stars too, being the runner up on that season and doing well even with an injured back and being in a powerful alliance there. The issue is she quit All Stars 4 very early on, being the first woman to leave there, and she was a relatively early boot on the Gauntlet 3. So she's very inconsistent and really doesn't have the heart to power through. At 62nd is Casey Cooper. It's crazy that I have her higher than Janelle, but she's more consistent. Physically, she's definitely one of the weaker competitors ever, though her elimination record is bloated due to her cheating the exhaust system on Fresh Meat 1. Essentially, she's only this high because she made it to the end game on all of her other flagship seasons. Not all of them, sorry, on most of her flagship seasons, i.e., The Ruins and The Gauntlet 3. She was doing well for herself and would have made it to the end game on All Stars 2 had she not been pregnant, and obviously the duel 1 was just a flop season for her. But overall, she's really not ever an early boot, and she always manages to find herself in a decent enough position politically outside of her first season, but that was mainly due to Wes. At 61st is Ibis Nieves. So she only did 3 seasons in an older era, so that was definitely a reason why she's lower. She did decent enough on her first season, won her second season, though she was seen as a weak link on that season, and went home somewhat early on her third season after being outplayed by Veronica. She only did team seasons, and despite her record, she really didn't do anything notable. At 60th is Jasmine Reynauld, so we're going to get to people who are a mix of all eras at around this point. So she has competed in a more competitive time compared to most of the other women below her, but her results are still awful. I will say that she's never been an early boot at least, but she has only made it to the endgame twice, has a horrendous elimination record, and has never made it to the final. Her non-threatening behavior and somewhat being social helps her on some seasons, but as we've seen, it just isn't enough. At 59th is Britni Thornton. She is someone who made it somewhat deep on 2 of her seasons, but she never made it to the endgame of a season, much less the final. It seemed like she was being protected by Brad on her second season, and she won a few eliminations on her first season, but the final season was a really bad showing, and she didn't accomplish much during her short time on the show, where she only competed for like a year and a half and 3 seasons. At 58th is Zara Zofanny. I'm pretty sure that this one is controversial, but if the UK spinoff was a longer season, like a normal length, she would be much higher, but getting second on a season with 4 to 5 rounds isn't something that I hold much weight. She was booted quite early on during World Championship and made it close to the end game on Battle for a New Champion after winning many dailies, and that's her big strength is her performance in dailies, but she really only had the competitiveness on her side as the social and political just wasn't there. At 57th is Nicole Ramos. I don't have much to say about her. Nicole had an unspectacular first season, and the same for Dirty 30, where she was kind of booted early to mid season on both seasons without doing much. She was a layup on Rivals 3, who got cut right before the end, where she and Dario kind of threw her own cousin under the bus so they could latch onto Bananas and Vince, and she was purged before even getting into the house on Vendettas being last place. Not much here at all, but was on a more competitive era. At 56 is Julie Stauffer. So I do kind of have a hard time grasping her. Julie was on the fourth season, which doesn't hold much weight, who was booted early on Battle of the Sexes. I believe she was the first boot because of her horrid social game. It seemed like people started to warm up to her during her final 2 seasons, where she made it to the end game and on Inferno 2, and then she retired on the Gauntlet 2, making it to the final. And it seemed like she retired before she could make her peak. Despite all the inconsistency, she showed some potential physically throughout all of her season, but she still only competed in the weakest era ever. At 55th is Kayleigh Cooley. I honestly could be convinced to put her lower. After a relatively poor showing on the Gauntlet 1, she ended up winning her second season, Inferno 1, as an underdog after winning many eliminations, though the only other season she made it to the endgame of, as I'm recording this, is the Gauntlet 2, where she made it to the final there, Gauntlet 3, where she's booted right before the final due to the Trim the Fat strategy, and I guess All Stars 1, where that really wasn't a competitive season, with several early or early-ish boots throughout her run. This ended up with her having a weak elimination record, and most of her seasons were on a weaker, team-filled era, and she still hasn't adapted very well. At 54th is Emily Bailey. It's really hard to talk about her. She never did a season with an elimination, and her seasons are really dated, even compared to some of the other Era 1 and Era 2 seasons. But she did well on the 3 seasons she was on, making it to the endgame of Battle of the Seasons 1, as she was pretty political there, and was running Battle of the Sexes 1 on a competitive and a political point of view before quitting. Obviously, she was on Extreme Challenge, which holds no weight, but the 3 seasons she did just had really dated format, and we haven't seen her in over 20 years. At 53rd is Kina Dean. I don't have much to say about her, and she really only has a notable season, in my opinion. She was an early boot on Battle of the Sexes too, which is partially due to her performance and poor play of the game. And she had a decent enough dual one where she made it relatively deep in the season, but not to the end game. And she had a good alliance there. But her only really notable season was the Gauntlet 2, and she was a captain that had to win a few eliminations to get that win. So she has a limited amount of seasons, and she competed in the older era. At 52nd is Cara Zavaleta. I don't have a whole lot to say about her, since it was clear that she didn't have much drive during her short one on the show. She did win the Gauntlet 1 after winning a few eliminations, so you could say that her best performing season was there. Her sloppy gameplay got her booted roughly 2/3 throughout the season on the Gauntlet 2, and she was playing for Susie on the Inferno 3, despite getting to another final. She only did 3 seasons and on the era, which were forever ago at this point. So at 51st is Amanda Garcia. For someone who has done as many seasons as she has, she should be higher on the list. Amanda has some notably bad seasons, i.e., Rivals 3, Dirty 30, USA 2, and Battle of the Eras. And while she does have some good seasons, mainly Invasion of the Champions and Spice Lights and Allies, she really had no clutch game, hence her poor elimination record and never making it to a final. It does not help that she self-sabotages at times, with Final Reckoning being the best example of this, but I'm pretty sure if I look deeper, there's more examples of this. Despite having some fight, she just doesn't have the skill sets to be a real threat. At 50th is Tula, or otherwise known as Big T, Fasa Curly. So I do find her relatively similar to Amanda in the fact that they have some good moments, made it to the end game a few times, but they lack a clutch game and never made it to the final, while also not having the strongest elimination record, though I think hers is better. After her offer first season where she was the first woman booted on War of the Worlds 2 and a meh Total Madness where she was taken out via injury, she got better on Double Agents where she made a few political moves and got in good with the veterans. Despite that, people still saw her as weaker in her next few seasons, and she's never really been able to overcome that, which we saw on Spies, Lies, and Allies despite making it to the endgame there, and Battle for a New Champion. The thing that benefits her is how she is socially compared to an Amanda, but she's seen as too docile and can overplay at times. At 49th is Kayleigh Morris, so I'm gonna discuss a few of the Era 4 and even some of the Era 3 women from here on out. I do think she is kind of tough to talk about, as she only did 3 seasons within like a year and a half time frame, if I'm remembering it correctly, and made it relatively deep on all seasons, though she never made it to a final in any of them. She quit on Vendettas without any sort of alliances, eliminations, or daily wins, though it seemed like she was probably going to be a layup for that season. She won 3-ish eliminations with Cam and benefited from the redemption twist, so that's kind of janky, and she did play a good political game on War of the Worlds too, though purges are her enemies in general. Despite that, it is hard to look at her individual stats, as there isn't much there, and her elimination wins you can kind of attribute it mainly to Cam. At 48th is Natalie Negrotti. She had to learn how to play this new game from Big Brother on Vendettas, and she was really the only one from her show to make it deep on that season, and she did make it to the end game. And the season that she actually did make it to the final on in Final Reckoning was janky as hell, so while she worked the format, I still don't give it a lot of props due to how janky it is. Her final season, War of the Worlds, had her eliminated early, since while she does have some strengths, her poor elimination record, messy politics, and size are huge disadvantages for her. At 47th is Melissa Reeves. While Melissa is clearly not a weak challenger, I don't really think she's a strong one either, so she's kind of in the middle here. She was booted early on in Vendettas due to her personality, though she did win an elimination there, and she got herself DQ'd in a day on Final Reckoning, so she started off pretty horribly. Melissa learned how to play under the radar and make it to the final on Total Madness, but her messiness caused her to be on the out on Battle for a New Championship, where she made it mid-season there. She could be there, but the consistency with Melissa really just isn't there. At 46 is Averey Tressler. I will say that she has never really had a horrible season, and I don't blame her for Rivals 3 due to Leroy getting injured, but she does have 2 meh seasons where she was booted mid-season and winning at least an elimination on each of them. She was a shockingly good competitor on All Stars 4, but her feel for game caused her to just miss the final there. So she's probably the best example of average overall, since she's never made it to a final, but she's never really been booted early on normal circumstances. At 45th is Marie Rhoda. I'm honestly shocked that she made it this high, though it's roughly in the middle of the ranking. Arguably, her best season was her first season, Battle of the Seasons 2, where she made it to the end game and she was playing politically, at least compared to her team. But in all of her other seasons but Final Reckoning, where she made it to the final on that season, which is her last season as I'm recording this, she had middling to poor showings, which we saw on Invasion of the Champion, Dirty 30, and Vendettas. She can be okay politically and socially, but her competitiveness is just really poor, and you can clearly see that in her elimination record. At 44th is Jemmye Carroll. She's another one who I'm pretty shocked is this high on the list, but I think it's due to her self-preservation throughout her many seasons, which is cool and shows some strategic insight at least. She had some early outs on seasons like Final Reckoning, Battle of the Exes 2, and Free Agents, but she also made it to the endgame on seasons like Vendettas, while making it to the final on All-Stars 1 and Rivals 2. She's mediocre at best, but not awful compared to some of the others, but her elimination record is still poor, and when it comes to competitively, she isn't the strongest. So we're going to move on to a bunch of Era 1 people from here on out, and at 43rd is Holly Shed. I could only put her so high since she only played in the dated OG era. I don't count the first 4 seasons, where she was on the 3rd season, but she almost made it to the final on Battle of the Seasons 1, though they are still midway of the season due to the format of that season, and she was arguably the strongest woman on the Inferno 1, which she did win. Still, only the 3 seasons in the easiest era to compete in. At 42nd is Roni Martin. She's very similar to Holly in the fact that she had success in the OG era, though one of them included a season where no one went home, which was the 2nd season, and she obviously won the Gauntlet 1. But I put Roni higher due to her All Stars 3 appearance and making it to the end game of that season. And I think on my graph for her on the other video, I forgot to highlight her for making it to the end game of that season, so you see that corrected here. So success in a modern season definitely bumped her up over someone like Holly. At 41st, I put Kendall Sheppard. A part of me wants to move her lower, and I might move her lower in the future, but for right now, I am fine with her being here. She won the Inferno 1 where she had to win an elimination and she held her own there, but she didn't return until All Stars 1, which was definitely a strong competitive appearance for her, despite just missing the final. The other 2 seasons were disappointing, though she was pulled on All Stars 2 due to COVID, where All Stars 3 was just an early out, and the political/social flaws that she had in general were just very apparent here. At 40th is Nia Botta. So Tina is mainly up here due to her OG appearances, where she had strong political/competitive moments and seasons on Battle of the Sexes 2, The Inferno 2, and Fresh Meat 1, making it to the final on the latter 2, and just missing the final on the other, though she was the main reason why they didn't win the Inferno 2. After getting DQ'd first on the Duel 1, her return to the show has been disappointing 2 decades later, or 15 years later, with poor performances on most of the All-Star seasons, competitively and politically. And while she improved physically on Battle of the Eras, her flaws are still too big to overcome, and her strong seasons are still in her first era. At 39th is Theresa Gonzalez, or Theresa Jones. I guess we'll go by Theresa Jones since that's her name with her latest season. I will say that she has some good competitive moments and made it far on a lot of her seasons, like Fresh Meat 2, Cutthroat, with her best seasons being Free Agent and Battle of the Exes 2, though she took a break right when she was getting at her peak. Despite being a good competitor, she only made it to one final that only happened due to Nia DQing on Exes 2, and she has a horrendous elimination record. She just never really learned from her political and social mistakes, and her physical skills isn't enough to make up for it. At 38th is Nurys Mateo. What she does have on her side is the mental components, and she can be political at times, which we see mainly on 39, but she is weak at all the physical stuff. Nurys has one mess season on Ride or Dies where she kind of mishandled her power and relationships, one good season in Battle for a New Championship, though she kind of blew it politically, but she was able to win out at the end, and one bad season on Battle of the Eras, so she's in the middle once you average all of them out. At 37th is Nia Moore. For someone who has a good elimination record and is very tall, a part of her is disappointing on the show. Her performances in the dailies are really poor on average, and while she has some good seasons, i.e. All-Stars 3 and Battle of the Exes 2, she also has some early boots too, like Free Agent and World Championships, with Battle of the Eras being a mess season. She can get into an alliance and she can save herself on the sand at times, but her lack of versatility and lack of will at points definitely causes her to falter at several points. At 36 is Sylvia Elsrode. What I will say is that for someone of her size, she has a lot of fight in her and has a great elimination record. While she has not necessarily been booted early, as at this point I'm only including up until Battle of the Era, she usually lasts mid-season throughout her runs. She only has one finals appearance, though it was on a janky season where she didn't need any of the janky formats like everyone else did. Sylvia needs more strong seasons to be higher on this list. At 35th is Tonya Cooley. Most of her seasons were on large team seasons, but even with that, she has a decent amount of poor seasons, like the Gauntlet 1, the Island, and I don't really consider Fresh Meat 1 or the Ruins to be strong seasons for her either. She has made it deep on seasons like Battle of the Sexes 2, and has 2 final appearances on the Inferno 2 and the Inferno 3, with her winning the latter, which is good for her. Tonya's elimination record is half and half, and she would be higher had she been more consistent with her good showings. At 34th is Robin Hibbard. Now that I'm thinking about it, I could easily switch her and Tonya around, and I could be convinced to doing so, especially with Robin's horrendous elimination record in comparison, and never winning at all. But I do think Robin is more consistent with finals and endgame appearances, at least with the first half of her career. She holds her own in the dailies and finds herself in the majority for the first half of her career. She floundered socially and politically during the second half of her career, hence some early boots on the Duel 2 and Rivals 1, but she ended on a decent to good note with Battle of the Exes 1, with just missing the final on that season. At 33rd is Diem Brown. She's also similar to Robin in the fact that they never won, and they both have horrible elimination records. The main difference is that Diem almost always makes it to the end game, and this has been the case throughout her entire career, not just for one half of it, and manages to find herself in a good political and social position outside of Rivals 2. She's a lot better than in dailies than I remembered, but she cracks under pressure, and the really poor elimination record just is something that I can't ignore, though she only went early once, i.e. the Ruins, where she might have thrown that. At 32nd is Jillian Zoborowski. Despite only doing 3 seasons, Jillian's track record is very good. She made it to the final women's round on the Gauntlet 2, won the Gauntlet 3 after going into 3 eliminations, and then going to the final on Fresh Meats 2 after winning some eliminations and dailies there too. We saw her in a pairs and a teams format, but her politics is really lacking, which is why she was in the position that she was in, especially on her latter 2 seasons where she needed to fight. Hence her being here and only doing 3 seasons that are 15 to 20 years old at this point. And at 31st is Olivia Kaser. Some people might think that this is too high for her, but she has been very consistent during her 3 seasons as I am recording this and playing in a more competitive era. Her first season is obviously her best, as she won several eliminations in the season, though there's some asterisks with some of those, and she did get to the final. Despite being well positioned politically on a battle for a new champion, that fell apart at the end and being booted right before the final there. And she had another deep one on Battle of the Eras, where she just missed the end game, where her alliance lost power in the second half of the season. She's a solid competitor with a good elimination record and can hold her own socially. At 30th is Ruthie Al-Qaid. So she's mainly remembered for dominating her first season, Battle of the Sexes 1, and she had one of the strongest seasons ever there, though she never fully lived up to the hype afterwards. Ruthie had another deep run on Battle of the Sexes 2, and her following seasons, i.e. the Gauntlet 2 and the Duel 2, which were more modern, she didn't really do well on, though she at least won a daily there. She did make it to the final All-Stars 1, which did kind of bump her up, but that season's the least strategic All-Stars ever. In general, her most disappointing, or her more disappointing seasons, not being the strongest strategically and politically, is a huge weakness of hers that she never improved on. Honestly, I might be argued into putting her lower in the future. At 29th is Kayla Casillas Bird. I think overall Kayla is a solid player, but I wouldn't say she's one of the better players. She had an early boot on Invasion of the Champion due to her own mess, but she started coming to her own as a player on Dirty 30 and Vendettas, where she improved competitively and politically. But after that momentum, Kayla got in her own way, causing for her to get booted right away via DQ on Final Reckoning and a middling Total Madness for her. All-Stars 3 was arguably her best season, where she had a dominant alliance and she performed very well in the Challengers, only for her final season in Ride or Dice to be her worst, where she was eliminated first. Kayla learned to improve politically and has her competitive moments, so she has a decent career overall. At 28th is Tori Hall. So she has only done 3 seasons, and 2 of those seasons were huge team seasons where she won both of them, which was the Gauntlet 3 and Cutthroat, though her wins are not seen as the strongest due to they're mainly coming due to the other team kind of self-sabotaging or blowing themselves up. Tori did make it to the endgame on the individual season, The Duel 2, though she was booted in the second to last round. A part of wrecking her is hard due to her relationship with Brad being so important, but she was always politically involved even without that, which we saw in her first season, and she was successful at it and could hold her own physically when she needed to. At 27th is Aneesa Ferreira. I'm going to keep this really short. Her first two seasons, which were the Battle of the Sexy seasons, are forgettable, but from Gauntlet 2 onwards, she relatively made it to the endgame in almost all of her seasons, outside of a few seasons like Rivals 1, Battle of the Exes, and Free Agents are the ones that mainly come to mind. She won a lot of eliminations throughout her long career, but she also lost a lot of eliminations as well, which is why her elimination records kind of split in the middle and got better in dailies from seasons like Total Madness onwards, or Double Agent and onwards. But the fact that she only made it to 4 finals, which were the Gauntlet 2, the Duel 2, All Stars 1, and Ride or Dies, and performing poorly in them, she never won and hasn't been in a majority alliance up until recently, which is the Vacation Alliance, is concerning. But we have seen her adapt relatively well to every format that exists on this show, so here she is. Her lack of endurance is horrible, hence her performances in the few finals she's made it on, and she hasn't improved over the last 2 decades in that regard. And like I mentioned earlier, 4 finals in like 20 seasons is not good. At 26 is Jen Grigalva. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. Jen started her career winning a few eliminations on the Inferno 3 and was on the out on that season, but she realized during her second season, The Island, that getting in the majority is the way to go. Outside of the Duel 2, where she again won a few eliminations, she rode on the JEK majority, which got her to the final on all 4 of her other seasons, which is The Island, Fresh Meat 2, The Cutthroat, and Rivals 1, where she played really well balancing both sides on Fresh Meat 2 specifically, but her performance and finals were very poor as she always got last in them. I do think she became a good political player and was a decent enough physical player. At 25th is Kelly Ann Judd. So she is often seen as one of the best to never win, and I do think based off her first 2 seasons, barely missing the final on Island and making it to the final on The Ruins, despite being on the outs politically on those seasons, that would be the case. She did have 2 meh seasons on her Era 3 comeback seasons, which were Battle of the Bloodlines and Rivals 3, but it was her getting to the final on both All Stars 1 and All Stars 3, where she probably would have been the female winner of All Stars 1 if there were gendered winners, and making it to the endgame of World Championships that rolls her stock again. Despite that, she had a poor showing on Battle of the Eras, and if I included All Stars 5, she would be lower on this list. And her inconsistent elimination record, as well as her fluky politics and social game, has her ranked around here, and it's been a consistent issue with her in that regard. At 24th is Amber Berzatra. Honestly, I am unsure about her placement here, since while she did win her rookie season Double Agents, though she definitely benefited from the skull twist, and made it to the endgame on Ride or Die with an impressive elimination record, I don't think she has consistency, and she made it to the endgame on Ride or Die because she was seen as a part of a weak team. Her other seasons so far have been meh at best, and her political and social game just isn't there at all, while not performing well in dailies, up until 40 that I'm recording and basing this list on. But she did accomplish more than some of the others, so here she is. At 23rd is Susie Meister. A part of me feels a way about her being this high, since she really only did team seasons 15 to 25 years ago. With one of them, I don't hold much weight, which is Extreme Challenge, and she was weak on that season anyways. But she was a good enough competitor on her winning Gauntlet 2 season, though she got a bit messy with the politics there, and she grew politically and competitively on the Inferno 3 and the Ruins, especially holding her own with a lot of the men on her last season in a cutthroat way that is not seen with women challengers in general, which is why she is this high, despite her game being slightly dated. At 22nd place is Michelle Fitzgerald. She is someone that gets better with every season and shows that she learns from her mistakes, which is very good. After an early boot on Spies, Lies, and Allies due to being a rookie essentially, and Survivor, and a middling season on Ride or Dies where she and her partner Jay just blew it politically despite them winning a few dailies, she started coming to her own politically on USA 2, balancing both sides before she kind of got caught and was booted in the endgame of that season, and she essentially ran battle for a new championship politically and socially while winning eliminations before getting purged right before the final on that season. All that led up to her winning several eliminations and fighting from the bottom in the second half of the season to get to her first final on Battle of the Eras, where the only hole I can see with her game overall is the physical element, and I do think she needs to slightly improve on that. And at 21st is the Nguyen. It's crazy that she's this high, but or in spite of her short run on the show. She did well on War of the Worlds 1 with her partner Wes and winning several dailies, causing her to get booted right before the final, and she found herself in a comfortable position on War of the Worlds 2, which gained her a win, though was probably her least impressive performance on a competitive point of view. Total Madness was her best season on a competitive/physical point of view, winning 2 eliminations and many dailies, but her politics and social game got sloppy, causing her to be booted right before the final. Essentially, she benefited from being on a more competitive era, but it's still only 3 seasons. At 20th is Jemmye Mannion. So during her first run on the flagship show, she never made it to a final, though she had some very close runs, like Rivals 1, Battle of the Seasons 2, and Rivals 3, and just missed the end game on Battle of the Exes 2. It really wasn't until All Stars where she saw the final and people started seeing her as a threat, where she made the first one due to being under the radar. She was under the radar on All Stars 2, but won that in a controversial manner as well, and had an impressive All Stars 3-1 where she had to win a few eliminations and won several dailies to get there. Since then, though, she's had middling at best performances, whether it's on Battle of the Eras or World Championship or outright flops like USA 2. Since then, though, it's clear that she's kind of just been stabilized overall when it comes to her career, and she still has a pretty poor elimination record they just can't ignore. At 19th is Jenna Campono. She had a very strong one on the show, making it to the final on her first 3 seasons, Battle of the Exes 2, Battle of the Bloodlines, and Rivals 3, though she made it there through different means, with her having to win out a lot on Battle of the Bloodlines, going under the radar on Battle of the Exes 2, and just riding her alliance on Rivals 3. And then she got purged right before the final on Invasion of the Champions, where she was not in the right side politically, and Dirty 30, where she actually played a decent enough political game, though she benefited from redemption there. But Jenna couldn't keep up the momentum, and she had a very early boot on Final Reckoning, and her final 2 seasons in War of the Worlds 1 and Total Madness were middling. She could hold her own physically, but that weakened, and the mental elements were never her strong suit. At 18th is Nani Gonzalez. She is someone that is the key of the word almost, as in she has made it to the end game on almost all of her seasons, but she's never pulled out the win. And the closest that she's come to winning was Free Agent and Ride or Dies, getting second those. Where those 2 seasons, as well as Double Agent and Spice Lies and Eyes, were the only seasons that she actually made it to the final. Nani does have a social game that's very good, and she has never been an early boot, which even most other legends that are seen as the best of the best can't say. But her elimination record is just a bit messy, though she can win when she needs to sometimes, but she can also lose just as much. And she likes the clutch game to get a win, always being booted at the end game or losing the final. At 17th is Coral Smith. So leadership came to Coral in the game right from her debut, where she won the Battle of the Seasons 1 in a pretty dominant manner, and then went on a streak of losing the final on the Gauntlet 1, the Inferno 1, and Battle of the Sexes 2, showing a lot of political prowess on all 3 of those seasons, despite that, and being good with her words. Her best competitive season is Fresh Meat 1, though she ended up getting DQ'd due to her and Evan's injuries, and she made it deep on Gauntlet 3, but she couldn't adapt the best because it was a new generation taking over on that season, and she quit. The fact that her seasons are so old also holds her back, but she's decent enough physically and good politically. At 16th is Cam Williams. I do think out of all the women, it could be argued that she's the best or one of the best to not win. She had to win several eliminations to get to her first final on Vendettas and made it deep on Final Reckoning, though she benefited from the jankiness of the format, especially with the redemption of that season. War of the Worlds 1 was not notable for her whatsoever, but she showed great political prowess on War of the Worlds 2 and Double Agents, while still being seen as a top female competitor, avoiding elimination in the former season and only going in once to get her skull on the ladder. All-Stars 4 was definitely a messy season, and she wasn't at her best physically, but she still showed some political control, despite her not knowing most of the cast on that season. The main issue with Cam is her lack of a clutch game with her not getting the win, and I don't know how great she is in finals. And it's not like she's going to be very consistent from here on out when it comes to her appearances. At 15th is Ashley Mitchell. A part of me really wants to put her lower, but she won twice in a harder era compared to a lot of the earlier wins, though her Final Reckoning win was way too janky for me. In the fact that she debuted like halfway through the season, and then there was a lot of randomness with that final anyways. Outside of that and Invasion of the Champions, which I do see as a relatively impressive win, she made it to the end on War of the Worlds 2, showing some good political movements and prowess on that season, despite being outnumbered in the beginning, and making it far on Spice Lies and Allies before she sabotaged herself on that season. Outside of those 3 seasons, she has just as many poor seasons, like on War of the Worlds 1, getting booted first, quitting Dirty 30, getting booted second on Total Madness, and getting booted early twice on Double Agents. Her elimination record is also not good, but she is good at endurance and puzzles, but has a lot of other weaknesses, and the lack of consistency is a huge issue. At 14th is Veronica Portillo. It took a while for Veronica to get into the game, as she was outplayed on Battle of the Seasons 1 and Battle of the Sexes 1, but her moment in stride on a competitive and a political point of view was clear and at its peak on the Gauntlet 1, the Inferno 1, and the Inferno 2. Despite struggling to adapt on the post-Era 1 seasons, she did have some good political moments on The Ruins and Dirty 30. Despite not making it to the end on those seasons, though she performed poorly on the following flagship seasons, which we saw on Final Reckoning and Ride or Dies. All-Stars definitely helped her out, where she played a good game on All-Stars 3 and made it to her first final in 2 decades on All-Stars 4. It's clear that she cannot adapt physically anymore, and while showing some political strengths past her prime, it doesn't matter as much without the physicality, but she has the longevity and can have some good moments, which is why she's here. At 13th is Nicole Zanata. I have to get the obvious out of the way. Mentally, she's a bum, and we see this in almost all of her finals appearances, or even just challenges that involves mental components, but outside of her DQ early on in Double Agents, she has made it to the finals on every season. She has never been voted into elimination, she's never been eliminated, and she always manages to be in a good position socially and politically, and doing this in a harder, more competitive era as well. But she needs to improve on her mental game in order to be any higher. At 12th is Emily Schromm. Her first 3 seasons were very good, as she was the last rookie standing on Cutthroat after winning a few eliminations, making it to the final. Emily continued winning several eliminations to get to the final on Battle of the Exes 1, where she found herself in a very good position on Rivals 2, winning several dailies and even going into an elimination, winning that season in a dominant fashion. Battle of the Eras was her grand return, and she went home early there, though there was some jankiness to that, which did bring her down slightly. And just missing the top 10 at 11th is Jodie Weatherton. After a troubling first season in the Inferno 2, she managed to get 2 wins on the Gauntlet 2, though that season was somewhat janky just due to the general format, and was the first individual winner that was a woman on the Duel 1, dominating that season specifically all around when it comes to the politics and the competitiveness. It would take her 15 years to return, where she did dominate the dailies on All Stars 2 before getting eliminated right before the final. World Champion was a season that she made it deep on, but she had a poor showing on Battle of the Eras. She does get flustered and isn't the great mentally, so those are notable flaws, but she is strong physically and has adapted well enough. I also didn't notice until just looking at it that Jodie doesn't have a good elimination record either. At 10th is Paula Maronek. Despite having a poor debut season on the Duo 1, Paula showed to be a good challenger, with making it to 3 finals in a row and holding her own from the Inferno 3 to the Island. She got messy on the Duo 2 all the way around, and this kind of continued on Cutthroat, though I believe she made it past the midway point on the Duo 2, and on Cutthroat she was booted right before the final. And it's ironic because her first few seasons she was seen as one of the guys by the guys, so she had that respect, but that went out of the window around this time frame. But Paula did start to get it together roughly around her final few seasons, as she won both Rivals 1 and Rivals 2, being in 2 dominant pairs. And Battle of the Exes 1 wasn't a bad season for her either, as she got booted right before the final there. Paula is a good runner and does well in a lot of challenges, but her elimination record is not good, with it being split right in the middle. And that's one of the main reasons why she's only at 10, and she's too much of a train wreck politically at times. At 9th is Casey Clark, so I might move her a bit higher. I'm not too sure about that, despite me dropping her a bit due to her inadaptability on Battle of the Eras. Casey came in hot on the show, getting second place on her first season Total Madness, making it to another final on Double Agents, where she won a lot of dailies on that season, and winning Spice, Lies, and Allies via the Vacation Alliance, though her performance in that specific final is criticized. She was always in the majority on those seasons and had an impressive World Championship, where she had to win several eliminations and wasn't in the majority due to the partner switch to get to her fourth final, and she was screwed on Ride or Dice due to her brother, where she still almost made it to the end game there. Casey competed on a more competitive era and was more successful, but her flaws are more notable now. At 8th is Rachel Robinson. So she had a rough few seasons where her political/social game causes her to be booted earlier than expected on both Battle of the Sexes seasons, but when she could focus on competing, we saw her do well on the Gauntlet 1 and the Inferno 2, giving her 2 final appearances and winning one of them while being in a good position politically. The Island was a poor season for her in a weird format, which is kind of just the trend with Rachel, and then she went back to dominating the dailies and getting her second win on the individual season, the Duel 2, while being in the majority alliance there. Her next few seasons really weren't notable, i.e. Battle of the Exes 1, where she was on the outs there, but she made it halfway, and All Stars 4 wasn't a reboot for her, but she did play well on Battle of the Eras, despite her entire team getting booted and winning a few eliminations, where I think she handled herself well politically to get to the end. But that was all pre-final. Despite her poor final performance, she did win Battle of the Eras and proved that she could hang, but is a bit more flawed/inconsistent than I realized. So at 7th is Jenny West. I usually don't put people who only played 3 seasons this high on any list, but Jenny competed in the hardest era ever and made it far on all of her seasons. She was the last rookie standing on War of the Worlds 2, despite being in the minority, and just missed the endgame on that season. She dominated Total Madness, getting her first win on an individual season and winning a few dailies, and she was in a good position through most of the season, but she got a bit sloppy politically at the very end. And then she won Battle of the Eras, despite not knowing many people on the season, but she got in good with the Bananas Angels, and she won a few eliminations and dailies to get there. She's good in finals and has a good elimination performance, but she only did 3 seasons and isn't the strongest socially, so there's only a ceiling as to how high I could put her. At 6th is Tori Diem. She was propped up as being a potential great from her first season, Dirty 30, where she made it to her first final. Final Reckoning was a very disappointing season for her, but she recovered with War of the Worlds 2, winning a few eliminations and being seen as one of the stronger women, making it to the final on that season. She flopped on her following 2 seasons in Double Agents and Total Madness for a variety of reasons, but she recovered on Spice, Lies, and allies, though that's probably due to the help of the Vacation Alliance, and went on a streak of making it to the 5 consecutive finals afterwards, with her winning Ride or Dice during that process. So with Ride or Dice and Spice Dice and Allies, she also made it to the final on World Championship, USA 2, and Battle of the Eras. She improved in the dailies, which we saw on Eras, has a good elimination record, and became a good political player, but her performance in finals do hold her back overall, with only having one win despite all the finals that she has made, but she could easily move up in the future. At 5th is Sarah Rice. From the beginning, it was clear that Sarah was a strong competitor, being one of the only people from her team to make it to the final on the runs, and she did that as a rookie. Her following few seasons were disappointing, i.e., Fresh Meats 2 and Rivals 1 being early boots, mainly due to her arrogance, and after getting a few DQs that aren't her fault on seasons like Battle of the Exes 1 and Rivals 2, she did have strong showing seasons in Battle of the Seasons 2 and Cutthroat, making it to the final on both and holding her own. She finally decided to prioritize herself so she could get a win by playing well politically on Battle of the Exes 2 between Bananas and Wes and making self-serving moves. And she was on an advantageous season for her on Rivals 3, where she won the title but not the money. Outside of the DQs, Sarah usually makes it far on her seasons. She has a good elimination record, and she's strong mentally, but her early boots that she does have were mainly due to her ego, and I do fault her for that. At 4th is Evelyn Smith. A part of me was hesitant with putting her this high, since most of her seasons were team seasons. After being the first boot on Fresh Meat 1, she established herself as a top female player from the Inferno 3 to the Island, which also includes the Gauntlet 3, winning 2 of those seasons and making it to the final on the third one. After being in a good position politically, she ended up on the out from the Island onwards, causing her to quit on the Rins because she didn't want to sell her soul to the JEK group again. Evelyn found herself in a good position on Fresh Meats 2, but her and Wes's overconfidence and sloppiness caused her to be booted in the endgame of that season, but things came together for her in all aspects of the game on her final season, Marvels 1, where she dominated and easily won the season for the women. Her elimination record is good, and she proved her dominance competitively, despite her seasons being 14 to 20 years ago at this point. But I can only put her so high since most of her seasons are team seasons. At 3rd is Camila Nakagawa. She got the rookie treatment on Cutthroat, but it showed how tough she was, just missing the endgame on that season. Camila won her second season on Battle of the Exes 1, where she played an impressive game with her partner Bananas and winning a lot of dailies, and made it to another final, Rivals 2, which was 2 seasons later. After her early seasons, there were some middling at best seasons, like Battle of the Seasons 2 being an early boot for her. Free Agents wasn't a good season for her at all, despite being booted mid-season. Battle of the Bloodlines, she was gone due to her sister, and Rivals 3 had her DQ'd midway, but things improved for Camila during the end of her run on the show. She proved to be the best veteran woman on Invasion of the Champions, where she got to the final there, and ended up winning the individual 30-30, despite her blowing up her own spot politically in the second half, though she dominated competitively. She would be higher if she didn't have a decent amount of meh seasons, and if her elimination record was better than the other two above her. Heck, her elimination record is worse than some of the ones directly below her. So the runner-up prize at second place is Cara Maria Sorbello. A part of me did think about putting her at number 1 since she has done the most seasons out of the women and had success on most of them. She did have some rough seasons in the beginning of career, like being booted first on Fresh Meats 2, being booted early to mid-season on Battle of the Exes 1, and Battle of the Seasons 2 being an early boot for her. But she has made it to the end in a majority of her seasons and went on a final streak from 30-30 to All Stars 4, which included 30-30, winning Vendettas, getting to the finals on Final Reckoning, War of the Worlds 1, and War of the Worlds 2. And she also won Battle of the Bloodlines, and making it to the endgame on some of those mid to late Era 3 seasons as well. Cara Maria's political game took a lot of seasons for her to improve on, and she is great at eliminations while actively improving as a physical competitor over the years. I do give her credit for her longevity over the decades and having a good elimination record, but her losing like 8 finals and only winning 2 of them is something that I really can't overlook. But she has a great track record on the show overall. And at first place is Laurel Stuckey, though some might feel a way about this, and honestly, I kind of do too, which is why I was almost considering putting Cara Maria above her. Her first few seasons put Laurel on a hot streak, whether her back was against the wall, like on Fresh Meats 2, or in a good position, like on Cutthroat and Rivals 1, as she won several eliminations and ended up getting to the final in her first few seasons, or first 4 seasons, winning on her 4th season Free Agents, which was a dominant season for her as well. After that, things kind of got messy for Laurel, as she just missed the final on Invasion of the Champion, and she had outright poor performances on War of the Worlds 2 and Ride or Dies. She came back on All Stars 4, winning a bunch of dailies, and won the season there, though the final was weird, but it bumped her up, though Battle of the Eras was an okay season for her. I think overall, she still holds that she can hang and she is multifaceted while still having the longevity. So, in conclusion, this is my list based on how I rank all of the challenge women who have done at least 3 seasons. As you can see, a lot of the Era 1 women are on the lower end because of the janky format and some of them not doing that many seasons. Shockingly, on the other side, there's a wider range of the Era 2, Era 3, and the Era 4 women, so that was kind of surprising as well. Just based off the 3 episodes of All Stars Rivals that's aired already, I already know that this list definitely changed quite a bit. And then when that season concludes, I'll have to add a few more people onto the list. I believe Ashley, Kelsey, and Devon I'll be adding to this list when that season ends. And then with the cast of 41 being announced, I'm gonna have to add Michaela too. So that will be interesting to see how it just kind of compares. And yeah, this was a fun journey. I'm doing the same with the men, and that should be out soon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll be back with more content soon. Wait, before that, I'm thinking about as All Stars goes on, or maybe at the end of it, either do a long video to talk about how this list changed, or I might make small short videos about the people who are going to be added in for the 3rd season, or whatever. But anyways, this is my ranking for the women. Thank you all for watching, and then this time I am going to go. Take care.